Imagine it, the year is 1829. The greatest clown to ever live, Joseph Grimaldi, retires. And a dike in Poland breaks, causing the death of 1,200 people. And in England, there is a Roman Catholic Relief Act that passes through Parliament. And for the first time in modern history, London gets a united police force. And the Greek Independence War is finally coming to an end after a decade, nearly, and the Russian-Turkish War has come to an end. In India, the practice of suti, which is where a woman will basically burn herself alive on her husband's funeral pyre, has been essentially outlawed by the British. Stateside, the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, has been ordained, and world's first prison to rely solely on solitary confinement has been built in Philadelphia. The U.S. tries to buy Texas from Mexico, in vain. And lastly, the 7th president has been sworn in. In Andrew Jackson's first speech to Congress as president, he advocated for the tossing out of the Electoral College. He also wanted to get rid of life appointments to government roles. But by now, there are once again more than one political party. The two parties that existed now was both Republican, but by different names. So the first one is the Democratic Republicans, also called the Democrats, which Jackson was the leader of. And then on the other hand, you have the National Republicans, which is also referred to as the Whigs. Henry Clay, a name you've heard before and you will hear again, was now the leader of the Whig Party. And it was his belief and exertion that Jackson was a usurper, and many referred to him as King Andrew the First. And it's not hard to see why, as I explain going forward, but a lot of people's problems with him was that he kind of didn't feel interested in getting together with Congress or anyone else when it came to his preferences. He strong-armed a lot of his power by using the power of the veto to get his way and his political party. One of his biggest showdowns throughout his presidency is one that you will hear again later, but for now, it was with the second bank of the United States, which is one I talked about in the last video. He told Martin Van Buren, who will be the vice president, that the bank was trying to kill him. But to be fair, they were basically a government-sponsored monopoly at the time as far as banks go, and Andrew Jackson didn't like it. And Henry Clay and Daniel Webster were actually attorneys for the bank, and so they were trying to recharter the bank, and they were putting through a bill. Well, as Jackson does, he vetoed the bill, and it just it drove the people he worked with crazy, of course the Whig Party, but it made him very popular with Americans. They enjoyed that he did that, including moves such as threatening to use the U.S. military to go and essentially execute a political leader in South Carolina because he disagreed with one of the bills. So, while Jackson was known for vetoing so many things, one that he didn't veto and actually was the creator and supporter of the bill was the Indian Removal Act, which once enacted would be later referred to as the Trail of Tears. In 1830, the act passed, and the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Seminole and Creek tribes were basically forcibly, the process started to forcibly remove them to land set aside for them west of the Mississippi. Over the 3-year period of the removal and relocation, about a quarter of the population didn't make it. And weirdly, Jackson tried to sell it to the Americans by saying, you know what? These people are actually endangered because if we keep them there, the white settlements coming in are creating a smaller space for them to live their normal lives. They can't do things like hunting and fishing the way that they did before all these people were kind of crowding them in. And if we don't do something about it, they're going to go extinct. But I would be wrong to not at least say that despite the fact that the act passed, it didn't pass without a fight. A lot of people who inevitably voted on the measure were very, very against it because, for one, we had treaties with these tribes from a long time back, since before we were a nation. There's been agreements this whole time, so it's almost like we're going back on our own word, and a lot of people didn't like that. Another thing is humanity. A lot of people were very much against this because these were people. This was their land. They were there first. The same reasons that we look back on it in history as a horrific time, a horrific stain on American history, those were the same reasons that people didn't want it to pass. But Jackson was a talented, charismatic person when it was something that he wanted. And like I said earlier, he strong-armed his way into a lot of things. So this was one. And if you've seen any of my previous videos, past few presidencies, Jackson's name has come up more than once. He's had it in for the Native Americans for quite some time. It made a name for himself. That's the reason why he's as notable as he did, because he was chasing them in Florida and other places, so I wouldn't trust him. So now we're back to vetoing things. There's a road bill, which is essentially to put roads in Kentucky. And that's where Henry Clay is from, so of course Andrew Jackson vetoed it. Which is funny though. He said that it was because that should be a state's matter. Let the states decide things like that. However, he was for federal funding of roads in other places. So in 1832, South Carolina comes up with an ordinance of nullification, which essentially says that South Carolina is allowed to nullify anything from the federal government that has anything to do with foreign commodities, which I talked about in my last video. The following month, Jackson issues a nullification proclamation which says states are actually not allowed to do that, and he will throw hands if they try to do anything about it. In an effort to be productive before he leaves office, he does create a position that is viewed as a special agent. Our guy goes and he does the first treaties we ever have with the Far East, including what is now Thailand. In 34, Jackson decides that he's going to withdraw immediately all the money from the Bank of the United States. And of course that was in his battle with the Second Bank of the United States. And when the Secretary of Treasury decided he wasn't going to do that, he was fired. And then Henry Clay and others led a movement to have the president censured. Because he's Andrew Jackson, he decides that it's up to him to cancel any debt we owe to anyone in any other nation. And finally, even though Texas is independent from Mexico, Jackson doesn't even want to talk about it because of fear.